Millions of children have been brought up in war-torn countries. After the bombs stop and the rubble cleared, their lives still carry the emotional and sometimes physical scars of war. Ursula Tabor was born near Bissingen, Germany in 1935, shortly before the outbreak of World War II. She was only 4 years old when Hitler invaded Poland, but she has vivid memories of those traumatic scenes of her life being uprooted as her family fled the bombing and struggled to survive. In her 2003 dissertation, Ursula wrote, "Every war is my war." Her hope is that no person, especially children, would suffer the scars of war. What was that all about, your statement, "Every war is my war"?
Because ever since the time it happened, for what I experienced, we had other wars and other horrors, and to this very day, and worse than ever. And sometimes I can barely stand it. Sometimes it just deeply, it always, it is very hard. Any war, it doesn't really matter, because there is no such thing as a good war. There is nothing such a good war. And yes, and war is horrible, and we are meant to love each other. And what we're doing is to killing each other. And sometimes I just cannot bear this.
Yeah.
But we all have to bear it.
Yeah. You were born March 28, 1935, near Stuttgart, Germany, in the small town of Bissingen, where your father had been elected mayor. Some of my earliest memories, you wrote, dating back to age 3, are delightful ones filled with joy, laughter, and being loved by my parents. Our home was the Rathaus, or the City Hall. My father's offices were on the first floor, while the entire upper part was our living space. Tell us a little bit about Christmas and what it was like when you were a child.
Well, my mom was a tough mom, but she kept us. She did all she needed to do, but on Christmas, around Christmas, she became very soft, and she was the only person allowed in the Christmas place. Yeah, because she wanted to be the one, and it was always wonderful. It was always lovely.
In your dissertation, you wrote, "Finally, Christmas Eve arrived. Soon after night fell, following the traditional meal of sausage and hard rolls, the house was darkened, while the Christmas room, which had been closed off for days and only accessible to Mama, was still dark. As we waited slowly, light began to seep out from underneath the closed door, and finally a bell sounded a silver tune, and the door opened to a vision of splendor and magic. There was the most glorious Christmas tree, with its flickering wax candles enhancing the sparkle of the tinsel icicles, flowing down like a silver veil arranged in amazing precision. Delight and wonder sparked by the sight of this lovely and delicate silver rain would be rekindled year after year throughout my childhood, regardless of the events raging outside." Now, you mean that your tree was covered in lit candles?
Candles, real candles,
Real?
real candles. Mhm.
And you never burnt anything?
Never. We were very careful of how dangerous it was, but we never had any problem. No, nobody. in the whole country. Yeah, that's how we did.
Unbelievable.
But it was just so lovely because how how it just belonged to it.
Yes, yes. You wrote, sometime after I had turned 4, I learned that I was going to have a brother, and I was sent to my Aunt Tony's house in Allendorf. After having spent 2 weeks at my aunt's house, the town crier was ringing the bell, announcing the news that Germany was at war and Hitler had invaded Poland. It was August 1939. In a moment, the carefree, happy days of childhood became a thing of the past.
That's true. Yes, that is true because and that was and that was this very part of the reality of war in many different ways.
Soon after this strange and frightening event, your father picked you up, and upon your return home, you met your new brother, Hans Peter. You said, I was seeking reassurance, but neither my aunt nor anyone else assured me that things were going to be fine. Slowly and insidiously, things began to change in our town of Bissingen. Papa had volunteered early on for active duty and was sent to France at first and later to the Russian front for the Russian offensive. Lots of changes. One of the most crucial functions Mama had to carry out around the clock was her involvement in communication regarding air raids. This meant being available day and night to receive and transmit warnings of approaching warplanes. She needed to activate the alarm system, a loud and incredibly shrill siren which warned citizens of the town and surrounding areas to seek shelter. You and your brother learned how to be instantly alert upon hearing the sound of the siren, dressing hastily and racing down to the cellar until a time when 4 small bombs were dropped in front of your house, causing the cellar to cave in. Thankfully, no one was injured, but after that you spent nights in an underground bunker which had been built in the yard. Since the raids extended from nights into days, it was never safe anymore to stay at home. So for several months, you trekked during the early mornings, during a lull in the air raids, to one of the old mines outside of town. Many of the villagers joined you hiding out there. But though you were safe, you have some unpleasant memories of that experience, right?
I really remember this terrible, this terrible smell, because people had to go to the bathroom inside. Yeah, because we spent there many of our days, and we don't. As children, as children, we simply did not know why we were in these places.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. You wrote, we had been kept in the dark for more than 8 months about the fate of my father. Finally, we received news that he was amongst the survivors, but badly wounded. He escaped the approaching Russians and ultimately was transported to an army hospital near the French-German border.
Where we picked him up.
You picked it, yeah.
My mom and my brother and I, we were there, yeah.
And you said you rode the train to pick him up.
Yes.
And that was a long train.
It was a long train.
Do you remember that?
Yes, it says something. Yeah, I remember my brother. We behaved so well. We were told we behaved so well because we were scared, or Papa, for finally, and we didn't know what was going to lie, how he was when he came. And when he came, he was he was not in good shape. His right arm was badly badly,
Badly injured.
very badly injured. In such a way they wanted to take it off, but he asked them not to do that, and they didn't, but he was in a lot of pain for a very long time.
In time, your father resumed his duty as mayor, but was obligated due to his position to be a member of the Nazi Party. You wrote, he had to wear a uniform with the swastika armband for official events, and was obligated to use the Heil Hitler greeting at all times. In fact, so were we. But I do not remember Mama ever obliging this rule. Mama oftentimes encouraged my father to listen to foreign radio stations, presumably to obtain a more balanced view on the politics of Hitler and the Third Reich. Papa, however, for some mysterious reason, continued to believe in the ideology of the propaganda machine of Hitler and refused to look at the signs of the time critically. By the spring of 1945, things had continued to deteriorate dramatically, and nothing felt safe any longer. Your parents decided it would be best for you, your brother, and your mom to go to live with family until the uncertainty of the war situation was settled. Your father stayed behind attending to his duties as mayor, and with the help of a Polish POW, you traveled by ox cart the 200-kilometer, 10-day trek to Allendorf to your Aunt Tony's house, the very same place where you stayed when your brother was born. You were 10 and your brother 6, and you found this journey exciting, looking up at the sky at night, tucked into your feather beds on the top of the wagon. When you arrived at your aunt's house, you were turned away. But you eventually found shelter for a few weeks in an old house in the woods with some other displaced people, though the thunder of weapons, explosions, planes, and gunfire seemed constant. After an entire week without hearing any shooting or explosions, you wrote, Mama made this rather strange decision to send me ahead to the village by myself to explore the situation and then get back to her. I marched into town pushing a child carriage, this was Mom's idea, and aimed for the house of my relatives. I reached my relatives' home, asking about lodging, and they somewhat relented, relegating us to a crude workshop for temporary housing. We moved in, and thinking back, I realize how extremely difficult this must have been for Mom, who always was so independent and proud. We did the best we could to survive, hiding during the day, sleeping on old mattresses on the floor, and frightened by marauding French soldiers during the early part of the occupation. We foraged for food and eventually were able to find an upper floor of a real house. While you were relatively safe away from home, the French occupying forces had rounded up all those who held public office and were affiliated with the Nazi Party. Your father was one of them and was incarcerated together with many other political prisoners for several weeks.
When he came home, he always was scared something, and he was rightfully scared. It ended. When the war ended. And he was very worried what was going to happen to him and to us. Yes. Because he had to be a Nazi.
Yes. Your dad had barely time to recover when he was picked up again, this time for denazification camp, where he became an inmate for 1 year, from 1945 to 1946. This was an initiative to rid German and Austrian society of the Nazi ideology following the Second World War. The tactics used in these camps sounded very similar to those used by Nazis, with forced labor, physical abuse, and hunger rations. To visit him each weekend, your mom hitched rides for the 2-hour trip each way, while you and your brother were at home and were told to pray. So while at this camp, a fellow prisoner created a drawing of your dad, right?
Yes. It deeply touches me always when I look at it, because it's like it's speaking. It's speaking. You know, the way his face, it's just full of sadness and full of suffering. And so it's a very important part of me.
And he had lost a lot of weight.
Oh yeah. He was nervous, and he has been ill pretty much since he came back from that. Even so, he got another job somewhere else, but he was never the same again. And he really actually died he was in his early 70s. Yeah. And I think it was, during the time when he was ill, and I went often to Germany to see him and to see my mom and see how they were doing when I was here. I did that once a year, at least, and sometimes more often. But he was always ill. Yeah, his heart and somehow it's not natural. I understood it because how could he not be? Yeah, but it was very sad to always see him, wondering whether he was still there when I would come back. And one time he didn't, but fortunately I was able to allow it. God helped me to allow when to know when he was dying. Yeah. And he was he was very, very special then, even when he was dying. And I asked him, it was so silly. I asked him, "How are you doing?" Of course he did terrible, you know. And he said, not well, child. And it was very painful, like it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know a little bit more about your schooling during the war.
Yeah, the thing about school, for a very long time during the war, we did not have school because it was too dangerous. The bomb does, and then. And all the young men in the schools were on the Russian front or somewhere else. And then we had some very old, very old, I shouldn't talk about that, men, seemingly, who were terrible, who were just awful. Not awful in terms of, but teaching us. Yes. And so we had very little. We learned very little during that time because we could not have we couldn't be in school because of the war.
You told me that because you had missed so much schooling, you hungered for learning. Fortunately, your pursuit of an education continued once your dad and family were united again. After the war ended, you attended business college, and after graduation, you worked at the city hall with your father. You wrote, "In time, my parents agreed with my long-held wish to attend nursing school. This had been a fervent desire of mine. Somehow, I wanted to help ease the world's suffering. After graduation from nursing school, I worked for some years of general duty nursing in my hometown.
And then I eventually thought, I wonder what else I could do in life, yeah. And I thought, I wonder. And then I said, maybe I wanted to go to different countries. My brother, my father actually said, no, you cannot do that. And I thought, know what I'm going to do? Oh, I know, maybe I learn a different language.
So I guess you saw an ad that the U.S. Army Hospital, about a half an hour from your house, needed nurses. So you and your brother, Hans Peter, who had a little English, and you had none, went to the U.S. Army Hospital, and your little brother talked to the guard and said, "This is my sister. She needs a nursing job." The guard, I guess, talked to his superior, and they let you in. And once they hired you right away, but you asked them to speak only in English, not in German. And they did. Now my question is, how long did it take for you to learn English?
It took me about maybe 5-6 months to be pretty fluent. And then Dad helped me decide, oh, maybe that's what I could do. I could go to a country which speaks this language, and I know the people already know.
Right.
And how about, and I talked to my parents about that, and that was a little bit more, maybe a possibility. But my father, of course, said, well, as soon as you get there, you come right back home. And for me, and I realized when I would go somewhere like this, it would be very great for me and very exciting, but it would be very sad for my parents. And I came by ship, and when I saw this, it was a big ship, the people put in the stuff. What do you call them?
The cargo?
Yeah, yeah. And that really I thought, wow, now I'm free. All of a sudden I felt, that's what it was so hard, but now I did it. Yeah, and I had a wonderful time on the ship. It was exciting. Yeah, it was everything new was exciting.
In 1964, at age 29, you immigrated to the United States. You worked and advanced your nursing education in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and San Francisco, California, and eventually specialized in psychiatric nursing. You moved to Oregon in the early 1970s. At least once a year, you returned to Germany to visit your parents and brother. So you wrote in your dissertation that you had an experience at a death and dying workshop that was quite shocking. What happened?
There was one woman about my age, or maybe a little bit younger, who, when she heard that I was from Germany, she attacked me. She attacked me verbally, and I was afraid she was going to hit me, or just because I came from Germany. And that was an incredible experience.
You wrote, "I had subconsciously entered into and remained inside this conspiracy of silence, together with my family and many of my contemporaries in Germany. After the death and dying workshop and the shocking experience I was forced to face for the first time in full consciousness this horror which took place in my country during my lifetime. It was an event which helped me to get in touch with and begin the healing work on my own buried and utterly helpless rage and abiding grief over what I had witnessed and experienced during these early years. How did this all make you feel?
It was very uncomfortable, I must say. And I got kind of scared because it happened all the time. Yeah.
You wrote that after awakening, every war fought since World War II became your own personal war.
Mm-hmm. When I heard on that, what comes, of course, always to my mind, when I don't really know how old I was, not very old, very young. When I heard for the first time Hitler's voice,
yes,
I was petrified, and I don't know how old I was, but I was petrified to hear this voice. It was horrible. It went right to my heart. I was too young to say, to kind of put it on why people belong on to a person like this. But I never forgot it.
After all your work as a nurse and a mental health specialist, you received a Master of Arts degree at the University of Oregon in 1984, and then a PhD in ministry in 2003. Following this achievement, you worked for a number of years as a college professor at Mount Angel Seminary in Oregon.
Very early on, I began to really love God, love Our Lady.
I guess that's one of the things I wanted to ask with all the experiences and the awakenings, how have you still connected with God today?
Even today.
Even today, despite your experiences with war and it being repeated, and especially now. How can you still have faith?
If I were not to have faith, I don't know what I would do. I don't know where to go. And I must say, it has been exceedingly difficult for me the last several years. I mean, months, years. What are we doing to each other throughout the whole world? It's, as I said earlier, in many ways, unbearable to me when I think how people suffer and how awful it all is. When I speak to God, see, you are the loving Father. I do not understand why so many good people have such a horrible experience and life and death. God, why? Why? And see, what seems to come back to me is, well, my child, your thoughts are not my thoughts, and I have to live with that. So yes, I do still believe, but I must say, and I guess I have to be honest. You know, even so, I do not understand God. Who does? Our brains are too little. Who does? And still believe in God, because where else would I go?
Ursula alludes in her dissertation to the many voices of saints, poets, and mystics who transcended the darkness and lived in peace and mercy in the midst of evil. She was particularly inspired by the voice of a young Jewish Dutch woman, Etty Hillesum, who wrote in her diary, An Interrupted Life, the diaries 1941 to 1943. She wrote, "Ultimately, we have just one moral duty, to reclaim large areas of peace in ourselves, more and more peace, and to reflect it toward others. And the more peace there is in us, the more peace there will also be in our troubled world. At age 29, Eddie died in Auschwitz on November 30th, 1943.
What would you like people to learn from this video?
To become aware how important it is to love each other. I don't, why don't we, Jesus came to this world to telling us how to be and how to love, and how to love each other. And what have we done since? Not only there, but also before, from the very beginning, when we were in the world as people. That's what we have done, killing each other. And it continues. It's always difficult for me. But that doesn't mean I don't believe. Like for instance, when I was in church this morning, I was thinking, wow, I'm just so grateful to be in. I love our church, and I'm so grateful for everything about it.
I remember a quote that you've often shared with me about your mom when she was maybe 84, you know,
Yeah.
3 years before she passed away.
That's right.
Yeah, what did she always say?
I cannot die yet. And I said, what is left for you? Because she was so old, old like me. And she said, I need to learn how to become a better person. And it was just so touching, and I never forget that, because that in a sense was her saying, I'm sorry, her own sorry. It's the only way she could say it.
During your last years of teaching at Mount Angel, you gave your students advice about living that you continue to model.
Yes, because many of the young people would come to me, and I loved it. Yeah. And they like to be with, we talk. And I always told them, do what gives you life. Do what gives you life. Yes. And I still, and what I'm doing right this very moment with all of you, I thank you for doing that. In a sense, for me, or not for me. It's not really for me. It's for everybody who wants to listen. But thank you for giving this opportunity, because it is so important.
Ursula Tabor is now 88 years old. Her "do what gives you life" philosophy has been reflected in her professional life, working as a nurse, a mental health professional, a university professor, and a spiritual advisor. She continues to express and model compassion, nonviolence, and her faith in God by facilitating groups in her church and home. Her beautiful garden has become her special life-giving sanctuary of peace and love. And along with her faithful companion, Odie, she graciously shares it with us all. Thank you, Ursula, for sharing your story and truly making a difference in our lives.